The name Lost and Found is meant to convey the short distance between success and struggle, and the unity that we have as human beings in that struggle that we carry each day, and the opportunities for us to overcome. Lost and Found seeks to end suicide in the United States by connecting young adults with the skills and community for lifelong resilience. We're all in different places in our lives, we're all in different locations, but we're still unified around this common idea. No matter how lost you may feel, no matter what hope you found at this point, we're all unified by this goal of finding mental health and living in a world in which suicide is no longer an issue. Lost and Found was founded by a group of University of South Dakota students with the goal of making a difference in the world of suicide prevention.
It's student-driven, it's led by the students, and it shows the students that they have the power to really cultivate a positive sense of well-being.
That continues to be at the core of Lost and Found's work today. Lost and Found programs focus on creating resilience for self, others, and community.
We want them to be able to walk away with tangible skills. So our chapter is really focused in on that. And then within that realm, we're focused on creating a community on campuses that is all-encompassing of the mental health needs of students.
We've also introduced the research piece that allows us to get a better understanding of practices on campuses and of students and how students are doing on campuses.
And where are those points kind of within the cycle of student services where we can make a difference and we can help.
And by having that understanding, we can better respond with programs, advocacy, and outreach that best meets the needs of our community.
This is one of the most open-minded and welcoming organizations, especially for those who struggle with mental health issues.
We could be a part of creating a solution, giving them skills so they could deal with their mental health struggles in a more productive, better way, but also just to have a language to talk about it and a community of support.
This is a great organization to get you talking about mental health and advocate for it and understand the importance that it will have.
There's so much that we can do, and I see the potential in that, in getting all of these people to come together. That will always excite me.
It's the best way to feel at home and to help others who are in similar struggles. If you're not struggling with mental health issues, this is one of the easiest ways to get involved and help understand those who are.
The reason that we focus on resilience as an organization is to unite people around the idea that we all struggle, we all face challenges, we all navigate difficulties, but the kicker is we can all learn how to navigate. We are compassionate.
We are inclusive. We are responsive.
And we are here.
Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to this week's edition of Voices of Resilience. My name is Erik Muckey, and I'm the CEO and Executive Director of Lost and Found. You might have gotten a sense from our intro video here about what Lost and Found is, but those of you tuning in, Lost and Found is a Sioux Falls, South Dakota-based 501c3 nonprofit that facilitates comprehensive suicide prevention programs for young adults 15 to 34. And Voices of Resilience is our weekly live cast here on Facebook that tells the stories and the experiences and shares the work being done in our community to help individuals, ourselves, others in our community find the resilience we need, especially as we're trying to stare down and build a world in which suicide is no longer an issue in our communities. Welcome. Excited to have you here today. And the focus that we're going to have today is leaning into community for our mental health. And we're happy to bring in our guest here in a little bit, Dr. Stephen Jackson from the University of Sioux Falls. The topic today and why we're focusing on leaning into community as part of your mental health is part of a series we're hosting this month to really talk about what it means to find wellness. When you think of wellness and you think of what that word typically is associated with, you think of physical well-being. So physical fitness, the ways in which you can eat well, work out, find sort of your physical wellness in this case. But what we really are trying to get across this month as Lost and Found and through Voices of Resilience is a different kind of wellness, and getting people to think of wellness perhaps a little bit differently. And what that means for us is being holistic in your view of wellness. So spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, the wellness that comes from being a part of your community. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more today, and talk about why community, much as we might think of it as something that's just sort of something we're part of or something that we identify with, is actually really an important contributor to your mental wellness, your emotional wellness. And where that comes from is that Lost and Found focuses on resilience. If you'd like to learn more about why we're talking about community as being a part of an important sort of diet for your mental health, I encourage you to check out apa.org/topics/resilience. This is really the basis of what Lost and Found focuses on, the idea of finding connections and finding community in order to build your resilience and build your well-being. First, before I jump in and introduce Dr. Jackson, I really want to first give a shout out to our sponsors who make it possible every week for this livecast to be coming to you every week, but also two organizations that have really made our work possible and some of the work you just saw possible. So the Aestra Family Foundation, based in Rochester, Minnesota, the Aestra family focuses their values and their charity and philanthropy on family, faith, and healthcare. And we happen to be one of their recipients of support. And we're very thankful for their gift in this past year to make this live cast possible. If you'd like to learn more about the Aestra Family Foundation, simply go to astrafamilyfoundation.org to learn more. Our other sponsor is American Bank and Trust, a longtime connector and supporter of Lost and Found. American Bank and Trust, based in Sioux Falls. You can learn more about their banking services by going to abt.bank. So thank you to our sponsors. Thank you for making these live casts possible each week and making discussions of resilience a part of our daily lives here on Facebook. Excited to bring to you today a really sort of outstanding example in our community of what it means to really lean into your community for mental health. And so today I'm proud to have on our show Dr. Stephen Jackson. Dr. Jackson is an associate professor of history at the University of Sioux Falls, where he started working in the fall of 2013. He specializes in an area that I really wish I knew more about, and I'm excited to learn more about it from him here, but also beyond 20th century British imperial history. He's also the author of 2 books. And in the spring of 2016, he was awarded the Outstanding Faculty Award by the University of Sioux Falls. And in his courses, as you'll see here, Dr. Jackson emphasizes the incredible richness of the human past and global awareness and appreciation of different world cultures. And he's a fantastic world traveler and has a story for us today that might be helpful when you're thinking about what it means to live into your community or lean into your community for your mental health. So bring you on here, Dr. Jackson. Hey, how's it going?
Hi, thanks for having me, Eric.
Glad to have you. So we talk often here about people wearing many hats, and I know you wear many of them. So what are some of the hats you wear beyond being a professor?
Yeah, well, I think to start with, being a professor is many different things. It's not just one thing. So as a professor, I'm a mentor, I'm an instructor, I'm a colleague, and I'm a researcher engaged in scholarship, trying to learn new things about the past. And then outside of that, I'm a husband. I'm an uncle to 8 nieces and nephews who are wonderful. I love seeing them when I can. And hopefully we'll be able to see everybody we want to more frequently soon. And yeah, Christian, person of faith, cancer survivor. So I guess that's a lot of the different buckets I fall into.
I love it. I'm sure you're keeping plenty of energy, not just in working with students, but it sounds like a lot of young folks in your life right now to try to keep track of. So
yeah.
I love it. So you ended with one that is really relevant to why we're here today. So one of the stories we're sharing is sort of your experience as a cancer survivor and how you leaned into your community. So tell us a little bit about that title.
Yeah, it's about 6 years ago, actually almost to the day, 6 years ago, that I was diagnosed with stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma, which, you know, so as a cancer survivor, I can make cancer jokes. If you're going to get cancer, this is one you want. It's kind of like because it's very highly treatable. And there was a lot of people at the time that told me that, and I didn't have that perspective then, but now on the other side of it, I kind of do. So I found out, I remember the timing because it was just before spring break. So all my students were out at the beach, and I was sort of getting to every test imaginable. And then it was about 4 months of chemo, 2 months or 15 radiation treatments over about a 6-month period, where it was just sort of getting by day to day, trying to muddle through. I kept on working, sort of for the remainder of the spring semester, and luckily that summer break, it sort of really saved me. I don't know if I'd have been able to do it the whole time. But yeah, it was definitely a challenge. I was just 30, which I'm sure to many of your listeners sounds really old, but I don't think it's all that old.
It's not. Can confirm.
Yeah. And was just sort of a big wake-up call for sure.
So tell me a little bit about sort of the fight. So being diagnosed at a young age, I'm imagining had an interesting impact on you, to say the least. What was the hardest part of the fight that you had to sort of encounter with?
Yeah, a few things that really stood out to me. And this is sort of my worst nightmare. My father had passed away quite young from cancer. So then hearing that, you've got it too, and that was a very different kind. Mine was much more treatable, but still, it was just sort of bringing back a lot of that sort of trauma from his very lengthy fight with cancer. I think for me, and I think maybe for younger people that experience something like that, it sort of pierces your aura of invulnerability, right? You think you're bulletproof when you're younger. I was running marathons and stuff like that. I mean, and then you're on the couch sleeping 10 hours at a time because you don't have the energy to get up. And I think, I sort of prided myself on being somebody that could be counted on to always be there. And for that whole length of my life, I couldn't be. I mean, I did my best. I managed to do an awful lot more than I would have thought I could, but I wasn't always there. I wasn't always as sort of on the ball and with it and able to contribute to the community as I wanted to. And I think maybe that's part of sort of my personality, right? I like to be one of the persons in community that's sort of the helper. I'm always trying to look out for others, and then to be for 6 months when I'm still so young, having to need others to really take care of me was definitely a challenge.
That point you just made is really interesting to me, Steve. I mean, the idea of being a helper frequently. So one thing I don't know if we touched on here, you were essentially brand new to USF, if I'm correct, or still getting kind of integrated in the community. What was that experience like, having to sort of not just navigate this and try to find a way to navigate this, but being new to a community? What was that experience like?
I think it caused me to be a bit nervous, but I shouldn't have been. USF is such a wonderfully supportive community. And I remember I started having to tell, the administration at the university, and they were so supportive. And I was like, you don't have to tell anybody, don't worry. And I was like, why wouldn't I? The nice thing when you're going through cancer, there's no like pro cancer party, right? Everyone is going to be behind you, right? There's no opposition team here. It's not a controversial thing. And it was a really powerful thing. I had faculty arranging, somebody brought us dinner once a week, and they would pray for us at chapel every week. Things like that. I remember distinctly one time, somebody came over, they were bringing a meal, and they looked up and they noticed that our gutters were full, and they were back within an hour, and they, changed clothes, and they went and took care of that, right? They just identified a need and took care of it. So I found that, when you're going through something like that, you want to have that, and that's when you really need to rely on community.
And tell me, so in that process, and I'm amazed, having now spent some time around the USF community, the story that you're sharing seems to really corroborate with everything that I've learned about being around that USF community. As you went through that process, sort of how did that change your perspective on life, but more so maybe how did that change your perspective on community?
Yeah, I think I remember when I finished treatment and when I started feeling more like myself, I kept waiting for the moment where I would receive all the wisdom that I'm supposed to receive after going through something terrible. And that moment just never came. And it was kind of disappointing. But I didn't notice, like, there wasn't like this moment where everything, my whole worldview changed. I would say I am a person other people can talk to now that are going through a similar crisis in their lives. And I often do. People often reach out to me because they know I've been through this, so I'm a person they can talk to. And sometimes it's not even people I know. It's people that, a friend of a friend, they heard I went through it. So, hey, can you tell me about your experience? So I can sort of be a resource to somebody to talk to with others. I've had students, unfortunately, that have been going through cancer that I've been able to sort of talk to them about their treatment. and about just how they're doing and trying to support them as best I can. So I think that sense of I've been there, and so I can really identify with other people is probably the thing that I've most noticed. But the other thing I'll say on sort of maybe a broader level is, and this perhaps goes back to getting this while you're really young, right? When you see elderly people, right, they're often very cognizant of like every day is a gift, right? And younger people are just like wasting time, and it's not. But for me, I see so many people my age now. I'm 36, mid 30s, and they're complaining about getting old, and they're complaining about how they just sort of want to think back to their youth. And I'm like, no, getting old is winning, right? We're doing great here. That's amazing. Like we should value every single minute that we get, and every minute that we have is just totally a gift for all of us.
I think I'm going to be using that one for a while, Stephen. The idea of getting old is winning. That might be a new mantra at this point based on this conversation.
It really is.
Truly. I think, and that's a really outstanding perspective. When I'm thinking of the experience he went through, and cancer is cancer, regardless of, the severity of it, I guess, in this case, but just the idea of what you learned in that moment, especially at a younger age, it's really valuable, I'm sure, for folks who now come into your orbit. And I'm maybe kind of even thinking even deeper on this level, in those moments, did you notice how much community had an impact on your mental health at that moment in time?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I kept a blog going the whole time. I was just looking back over it in preparation for our talk today. And I had a whole post, and the title of it was, I've been George Bailey'd, right? There's this great scene at the end of It's a Wonderful Life where the whole town comes together and they all sort of give him all these gifts. And it's just this amazing story at the end. And that's very much how it felt like, right? People would, they were organizing meals, they were praying, they were, people would just sort of reach out. For a very long time too. It's not like it just happened once, but is very sustained. And that sense of community was overwhelming at times, and it was powerful and certainly helpful in those moments where I didn't really want to be happy, and I didn't really feel like things were going to work out okay.
And I think I might also use that phrase too, getting George Bailey. That's probably one of my favorite movies, to be honest. That's really cool to hear that experience. And I would love to see if there was ever a physical manifestation of that, if that actually showed up for you. I'd love to capture that on video. Well, and I know it's very interesting to think here. So if you were to sort of bring that out for somebody when you're offering advice to somebody who's going through a similar experience of what you've had, what advice do you give them about sort of their mental health or the community element of navigating difficult circumstances?
Yeah, I think each case is unique, and everyone is going through something different. And everybody experiences cancer differently, right? That's another thing that I learned, right? Is we have this one word to describe what is actually many different things and illnesses that people are going through, and different experiences are going to have different ramifications for your family, for your job, for all the for how you make it through that process. I think it's important for people to have somebody to talk to about it, and whether it's like in my case, I was just like, I didn't care who knew, and I was going to tell everybody. Not everybody wants to do that and be that sort of open and upfront, but I think letting people that you trust in and letting them know what you're really struggling with is really important. But I think to me the more important thing is when I talk to people that aren't going through it, because again, there's no pro cancer side, right? Everyone's like wants to support cancer people. I don't think there's a great deal of thought into how do we do that. And I think that is a message that I hope gets out a little bit more powerfully. So, the question I got asked more than anything else is, what can I do to help? Right? As if suddenly I got sick and I became a general in command of a whole army of people and knew exactly what to tell all of them. And I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what I was going to go through. It's the first time I'd ever been through it. And I was just very polite, but I didn't know what to do with that question. And I think my experience was when people sort of said, hey, here's the thing that I'd like to do for you that I think will help you. Is that okay with you? Right? They'd come, they'd talk to me, and they'd sort of ask permission. They'd tell me why and how they thought it would help. Or if they identified a need, right? That's, I think, the best way to be supportive to somebody going through something like that.
I really appreciate that thought, Stephen. That's a fantastic, just the idea of being able to think through, and this, I know this is directly applicable to mental health, just, navigating depression, anxiety, whatever that is, if you don't know how to help yourself. And that line, I loving the one-liners today. I just, there's got to be some sort of poster that'll go up here soon to say, I had depression, I'm not a general, or I'm dealing with cancer, I'm not a general of an army, just in order to make that ask. And I think it's really good for us to share that consistently, offering help is a real sign of friendship and community, but doing so in a way that doesn't put that burden onto the person being helped. So I appreciate that perspective. And I have to share for folks too. So getting to know the University of Sioux Falls community has been kind of a blessing for Lost and Found. And I know that that's been the case here for Steven as well. So just sharing a link to find out more about USF, just go to usiouxfalls.edu. You can learn more about the university, what it's about, and sort of the community that Dr. Jackson's a part of. So elephant in the room, of course, you're a professor of history. So I do want to ask you, thinking about community, I know you have a very unique perspective on community just because of the fact that you study history and you study societies over periods of time. So I know that we may not have a lot of classes on mental health history. And frankly, if you taught one, I would take it. I'm curious, as you think about the time periods you studied, how does mental health show up in some of that work and some of those periods that you're sharing with your students?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and it's becoming something that more and more scholars are interested in and looking into, but it's really difficult to access. And the reason for that is that people in the past, so I mean, there's a couple of problems. Number one, most people don't leave us any sources. We don't have their personal journals, so we don't know what they thought or what they were experiencing. Just most people throughout history just don't leave us anything that we have to offer or to use anymore. But I think the other thing is that when they do write these things down, they have a very different framework to think of these things. We have centuries worth of really intense research into psychology, into wellness, into a lot of these kinds of things that, that's very new. That's not something that they had. So they experienced these things. They went through depression. They went through hard times. They had to exhibit resilience, but they thought about them very differently. And I can think about that even in my own lifetime, right? I mean, as I sort of was in college, 20 years ago now almost, we didn't talk about these things in the same way that we do now. So if that difference in, just 15, 20 years is that extensive, that we're talking about it in a way that we didn't, what is it when magnified by 100 or 150? So scholars, there's a really great tradition now, and we have a whole subfield in histories of medicine, histories of emotion. And emotion is really interesting because humans have defined emotions in a lot of different ways, and they define the experience of emotion just fundamentally differently. And it makes it, I think, really fascinating, but also a really tricky thing to study.
I have to ask, as you're thinking of history of emotion, what has your exposure been to that field? And can you tell the folks listening sort of what you've seen come from that field?
Yeah, I experience it. So a lot of my work deals with education across the British Empire. So I experience it more through, there's another subfield called the history of childhood and adolescence. And the basic premise there, and so they do a lot of work into emotions as well, the emotional experience of being a child. This is a very new subfield, like last 10, 20 years. But the basic idea is, hey, pretty much all history is written by and for and about adults, or assuming that adults is the normal category of existence. It's like, actually, there's these other categories that we should be talking about too, that the experience of childhood, the experience of adolescence and youth are unique time periods in a human being's life. And we should take that seriously and try to understand what those experiences were. But even that is really challenging because, again, students or young people are not leaving us a great deal of sources. So we're sort of reading it through adult lenses most of the time. But I think there's a new awareness to it, and it really does. It does make an impact. So I was writing this morning, and I'm looking into these old textbooks and how we've taught history to people. And these are books written by adults for students, and you can even see how they're changing their language, what they assume students are able to understand. And then there's all these fights over, there's always fights about textbooks, right? What should go in them, what they say. And I always wonder, none of those fights ever involve the people that are actually consuming them, right? They're just assumed to be passive receptacles for this information.
Yeah.
And that's not at all how they experience it. So we really need to sort of to think about so many different viewpoints to get a more accurate picture of what was actually going on.
I now have a vision of you sort of taking a laptop charger, plugging it into a student, and say, you are a receptacle of this knowledge. Just watch them fill up with this information. That's really interesting perspective, though. The idea that we're really trying to kind of fight over or discuss sort of how we present history without really considering who the end consumer is, so to speak, of the people that are actually reading it. And as I'm thinking of that, so you just made a comment that was really, I think, powerful, talking about sort of almost like micro history versus macro history, like this idea of like 15 to 20 years versus, 500 years. As you're kind of going through your study and also thinking of it in terms of the experiences that you've had, so say 150 years ago, are you seeing some differences in sort of the mental health needs of young adults through that lens? Are you seeing some changes in history based on that?
Yeah, there certainly are. I would say, are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Because I think
absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
Abraham Maslow is this really influential psychologist in the mid 20th century, and he comes up with this idea that the end goal for human beings is self-actualization, where we reach our full potential. But before we get there, we have to meet all these other needs, including what he called the base level of it. Is usually visualized as like a pyramid, and the base level is basic stuff like food and shelter and warmth. And Maslow calls that basic, but throughout history, that's like the only thing people care about, right? Because they need those things before they can do anything else. So until you get to sort of the Industrial Revolution, really, most people, most of the time, most of their activities, their work is dedicated towards providing themselves with those basic needs. And so there's not a lot of, attention to the higher levels of those kind of needs. And that's sort of a psychological explanation for that. But most people are going to be just engaged, 12 hours a day in agriculture, right? Growing food, because that's what they needed to do to survive. Once we get to industrialization, we do start to see some of the things that we continue to deal with today, right? When we move from village life, where we're tightly wound communities that everyone knows everyone else, and you have this real sense of connection, to now we live in a massive society and everyone's anonymous when they're walking down the street. That causes a lot of these issues, a lot of sense of dislocation, sense of alienation and isolation that I think we still continue to see today. But in terms of 150 years ago, so many of the things that we struggle with just aren't there, right? They don't have, social media or the internet, those kind of things that are constantly driving distractions. A lot of the technological things that are a part of our everyday activities just don't exist yet. And the working conditions are so greatly different that they're going to think about these things in a very different way. But that's not to say that they weren't dealing with the very real issues that you and your organization, Lost&Found, continue to work against, working on issues of depression and mental illness and suicide and so many different things. They're still there. It's just, again, through a very different societal framework.
And I am curious too. So I think you made a really important point talking about community. So the idea of, if you've kind of left these tightly wound villages and you moved into this larger context where you're maybe not as known by other people, it creates a whole other set of challenges. From your lens in history, is there any sort of lesson that we can learn today about sort of how we might go back to some level of community, or sort of examples that you see in literature of that?
Yeah, historians are not usually sort of focused on sort of what we can do now, but I'll say maybe from my own personal experience, I think you have to be really intentional about it. You have to approach everyday life as if you are intending to build community, right? And that's awkward for people, especially people more accustomed to, texting and being on a phone, where you don't have to have actual face-to-face communication with people. But get to know your neighbors, get to know your classmates, get to know the people. And that involves having conversations that are going to be awkward and they're going to be weird sometimes, but it's also going to lay the groundwork for a real sense of community and rootedness that I think nowadays it's not something we can assume we'll get. It's something that we have to be intentional and build ourselves.
Intentionality is everything. I appreciate that perspective. I know one thing I'll share before we kind of transition some of our questions here. For those of you who are looking to find ways to sort of build community and find ways to also sort of have these conversations that Stephen's talking about, we're really trying to figure out ways to be intentional. We encourage you to follow us on Instagram in particular, but you can follow us on any social media platform. Lots of content coming from Lost&Found right now, focusing on things like building community and talking about what finding ways to talk about mental health and suicide prevention in really approachable ways and in sort of your immediate network. So follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, especially Instagram. I highly encourage you if you're looking for sort of that. I don't want to call it postmodern version of community. I could make lots of jokes about that, but find ways to speak about mental health in your community. Here's ways to do that. So there's kind of another element to this conversation I wanted to get to, and I'm fascinated. So you mentioned that you're a traveler and you love to sort of get out into the world and kind of experience it. Probably not that much in 2020, but before 2020, what were some of the favorite places you traveled, and what were some lessons or takeaways you got from those experiences?
Well, if you're going to be a historian, being a historian of the British Empire is great because you get to go to all sorts of cool places to find the archives, and great places to visit. I remember when I got into the field, I wondered, like, there's an awful lot of scholarship on the Caribbean. And I know the Caribbean's like really important, but I wonder, are people just like going because it's a great place to visit? I mean, it's a great place to do your research. Yeah, we've gotten to do quite a few trips. So I've been to all over sort of the settlement areas of the British Empire. So Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the UK itself. I've led a couple of study abroad trips with students, which I hope to do again when all the restrictions are waived. Most recently, we went to Peru. We got to go and see Machu Picchu, which was absolutely incredible. Yeah, definitely. I mean, travel is just such a great way to sort of see the world and see places and people that you aren't normally going to come in contact with, and see other ways of sort of just other ways of being, I guess.
And in that sort of other way of being, you know, what about your experiences gave you a different perspective or different sense of what community looks like in different parts of the world? Any examples you can share?
Yeah, I mean, everywhere I've gone, I've been primarily engaged in research. So I'm forming community with other researchers, right? There's nothing quite like, you know, the boredom that you experience with somebody else who's been poring over the same dusty stuff that you have for several hours. You know, you get lunch break, you really get to talking about things. So with other researchers, I've been involved in churches wherever I've gone. And that's really quite interesting because you do get different sort of perspectives, different ways. I mean, there's different worship songs, right? Different ways of conducting the service even. I remember when I was in a church in Australia, and they were talking about, today we're going to be reading from the book of Isaiah. And I was like, wait, isn't it Isaiah? And it's, well, in Australia, it's
that's
Isaiah.
how they say it.
Yeah. Right? Little things like that it's just, this is the way things are supposed to be. Right. And it's, well, not everywhere. Yeah. So, I mean, those experiences of finding community, I think have always been, again, an intentional part, because the sense of isolation you can get when you're out by yourself in particular can be very real. So just finding different people to talk to, and just asking about people's stories is always a great thing to do while you're traveling.
And thinking about that specifically, so the stories element, you mentioned this throughout, you know, you really love stories, and that's one of the things that sort of drew you into history. When you went to some of these places, and I know it's probably sounding a bit like a broken record when you're thinking of community and mental health, you know, in those places, what did you notice about, you know, the mental health of the people you were engaging with, and sort of what that looked like in terms of the communities you were part of?
Well, for the most part, I mean, most of the places I've been are other sort of advanced industrialized countries that are English speaking, right? I mean, I'm not visiting the more exotic locales of the British Empire. So they're very similar and struggle with very similar things. I would say the biggest difference is that for the most part, you know, getting mental health help is free. Right? They have national healthcare systems that, you know, if you are experiencing some kind of mental health issue, it's not going to be a financial burden on you or your family to get that taken care of. You're encouraged to do those things. And the idea there is that society's better off if we have if people are able to get help when they need it, regardless of whether, you know, they can afford it right now in this immediate term. So I'd say that's probably the biggest difference from sort of our healthcare system and what you'd notice if you're in the UK, for instance.
Interesting. And there's a lot that I could try to unpack there, but I'm very interested to think through, you know, in terms of your travels, and obviously a lot of it's been focused on scholarship and sort of the communities that come with that. How did that help you sort of how did that make the experience better, I guess? And sort of, and it maybe seems like an overly simplified question, but I'm thinking of, like, if you were to go there alone versus going there with a larger community, sort of what differences would you probably notice in that sort of that experience?
Yeah, I've done it both ways. Like when I'm leading groups of students, or when I was a student, I did some study abroad trips. I basically talked to and got to know better the people on my trip, which were other people from the same place as me. And I didn't really talk to other people. But when you're out there by yourself, it's either that or you're just sitting in your room talking to nobody, right? So you got to go and talk and meet people from these other places. So I think there's really something to that, that it really does sort of force you out of your comfort zone a little bit, of these same people that are from my school and that I know already, and I have these pre-existing relationships. Like, no, you got to go and you're talking to somebody new every day that you've never met, that talks a little bit differently than you and has different life experiences than you. And I think it's always sort of, I don't know. Again, it can be awkward, and I'm always running the risk of putting my foot in my mouth whenever I'm talking to anybody. But it's also very rewarding when you get to know people, and again, just hearing stories about people that have very different way of seeing the world than you do.
I think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned for folks watching who are saying, ask about stories, ask questions, be curious, and really be intentional with that community. I think that seems to be the message I'm getting today. I know I'm appreciating everything you're sharing here and sort of what that turns into. For folks listening here, again, if you'd like to learn more about USF, I'll just share the link here on the screen. We'll also share a little bit of info here. If you want to get in touch with Dr. Jackson and actually get to know kind of him, his work, and follow up here, we'll share this link. It's a very long link. It's not going to be the one you're probably just going to copy and paste right here from the feed. So we'll share that here in the comments. But lots of perspective I think you can probably learn from Dr. Jackson beyond even just this conversation here. And I'm kind of changing the question path here a little bit for you, Dr. Jackson. So let's do a little bit of rapid fire here and see what we come up with. So we talked about you're a scholar of British imperial history and modern European history. If you had the single most important thing you've learned from your studies, what is it?
Oh, just one. Well, there's so many content things I could tell you about what happened and when and why the world we are is the way that it is based on sort of where we came from. But I hope if my students and I certainly have approached history in a way that I want people to take away from history, that it should and can help you develop your sense of empathy. When you are looking at the past, you are putting yourself in the shoes of other people. You're trying to understand why they did what they did, even choices that you really disagree with. And boy, there are a lot of those. Why did they make this call? And you have to understand it, right? And don't just say you're wrong, so I hate you, right? Say oh, actually, it's still important. I have to really think about why this person who otherwise made all these, is a good family person and all those things. Why did they do this thing? Why, what made this choice? Or maybe even just as challenging. Sometimes we have this really heroic figure that we've learned our whole lives is this great figure. And then we learn that, hey, maybe they did something that maybe we're not so proud of. And we have to really wrestle with, well, what do I think of this person now that I know that they did these really awe-inspiring things, and then they did some things that are like, ooh, kind of cringe-inducing. And I think that brings out empathy. And I hope that people can take what you learn from a history book or in a history class, and you can apply that to the people that you see every day, the stuff that you're reading online. There's so much that we are seeing and reading that I think makes us want to hate or love someone. And usually, human beings, we're just complicated, finicky creatures, and we're somewhere in the middle. And I think it would do us all a lot of good if we just thought of everyone else as a thinking, feeling human, and try to understand where they're coming from.
I think I'm going to have another sign branded above my desk. History is empathy. I love that perspective. Second rapid fire question for you. First place you're traveling to after COVID-19 restrictions lift?
Oh, man. Oh, boy, do I hope that happens soon. I have been talking to my mother for years now. She's never been out of the country to take her abroad. It's a milestone birthday for her this year. So I'm hoping if the restrictions are lifted, I'm hoping we can go and I'll take her to see London.
Fantastic. Let me know how it goes. I'm going to need some tips when I ultimately make that trip at some point here in the next
time. But there are no wrong answers. There's a ton.
I love it. So this one got thrown at me a little while ago. You're on your last $5 in cash. There's nothing, you don't have any other money with you. What are you doing with it?
Oh man. So I'm imagining I'm having a pretty rough day if that's where I'm at. You know what? I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna go to Vinyl Taco and I'm gonna see how many tacos $5 will get me to. I bet it'll give me a taco and a Coke. And I feel like I'm gonna just sit down, I'm gonna have a meal, I'm gonna consider where I'm at in my life, and maybe things will pick up from there.
Good to know. I'll take you to Vinyl Taco the next time we're in town together. Favorite place in Sioux Falls?
Gosh. It's not a place. What I love most about this town is I love the quirky little festivals and celebrations that we have, and they start in the spring, and there's almost one every weekend, in June, July, and August, and it's just they're all kitschy and they're weird, and we don't have we have Cinco de Mayo Fest, and it's never on the 5th of May for some reason. There's so many strange things, but those festivals are great, and I really, really am hoping that we get back to a place where we can have those safely this year.
Well, I'll have some festivals to share here with you shortly, I have a feeling. Last one for you. This is one we've been asking consistently. We're actually building a playlist of songs someone needs to hear from 2021. What is one song you think someone should hear today?
Oh, well, it's not from 2021, but I'm teaching a class on the American Revolutionary Era right now. So I've been listening to Hamilton pretty much nonstop. And I think you could just pick any of those songs. They're all really great. But, because of, what I do, I'm going to say History Has Its Eyes on You is a pretty great one. I
love it. Okay. We're going to pull that one out. Okay. Last question for you for the day. So just kind of the big one. What's one thing you've learned in your life that you wish everyone else understood?
I think, and maybe this comes from I'm a middle child, and maybe it comes from being a historian, but I really wish that people would treat everyone else like they're people, just like them, and that it's not just your team or your family or the people that that deserve to be treated like a fully realized human being. It's everybody, even if they do things that you disagree with. And there's so much vitriol and hatred when you're scrolling. My new word for this past year is doom scrolling, right? Where you just scroll through social media and you see nonstop terrible things, but it's so many people constantly saying these mean and nasty, terrible things to others. And I just hey, actually, maybe there's a place for kindness, respect, and empathy. And maybe we should focus on those things instead of saying these really terrible things to one another.
Well, I'm hoping here today people got a little bit of a break from the doom scroll. So I think we've given them more than enough content for the day to help them out. Stephen, thanks for your time. I want to just offer before we jump off, any final words or anything else you'd like to share today?
No, I just wanted to say thank you for having me, and thank you for the work that you're doing with Lost and Found. I think the mission of the organization is a really important one, and I'm glad that it's something we have here in South Dakota.
Oh, likewise. I'm glad to have you here, Stephen, and thanks for joining us here this afternoon.
Thank you.
So, folks, so ends another episode of Voices of Resilience. I want to share, as we always do, some updates from Lost and Found. And one of the big things I will mention here at this moment in time is we have some events that are coming up. And naturally, as Stephen mentioned here, festival season's coming up here in Sioux Falls, and obviously we're being mindful of COVID-19 restrictions and being mindful of sort of the ways in which we're opening up and vaccines are being distributed and so on. And so as you're looking ahead to late spring, Lost and Found is proud to announce we'll be hosting an event at Severance Brewing as a fundraiser for Lost and Found on May 1st. We'll share more information here on social media here this week. I mentioned our handle. Just simply follow us here at Resilient Today. You can obviously follow us here from the video if you're watching at this moment in time, but we'll share more information in the coming days and weeks about that. We're also getting into the swing of things, no pun intended, but actually it is intended. We do have a golf tournament we're hosting on July 23rd. It's a Friday. It's a memorial tournament for the Longley family in memory of their son, Ben Longley, who died by suicide this past July over at Grand Falls Casino and Golf Resort. If you want to learn more and register, you can go to bit.ly/longballclassic to sign up and join the fun and join the memory and join the event and celebration of Ben's life, all with all proceeds benefiting the programs here at Lost and Found. Again, thank you for joining us today. And I encourage you, as you're thinking of this conversation we just had and sort of what you learned from Dr. Jackson, I really encourage you to think about what it means to find community and why community matters to your mental health. It is one of the leading indicators we look at when it comes to things like resilience and protective factors against suicide. So By having a community, by being intentional about community, as Dr. Jackson was sharing, you have a better chance of actually reducing your risk for suicide, but also mental health conditions, just broadly speaking. So if you want to learn more about how community and connection contributes to your mental health, simply go to the apa.org website and search resilience, or you can search resilience APA in your Google search bar, Bing, whatever you're looking for. It'll all get you to the same place, but the idea is here, take a look, learn more, see how community contributes to your mental health and your ability to reduce risk for suicide. Thanks, folks, for joining this afternoon. My name is Erik Muckey, Executive Director of Lost&Found, and this was Voices of Resilience. Join us next week for more and our more focus on wellness in our community. Thanks for watching today. We are compassionate.
We are inclusive.
We are responsive.
And we are here.